Have you ever wondered if someone we often consider invisible in our daily lives might be carrying a story we could never imagine? In a world where status and appearance often dictate how we perceive others, sometimes the quietest people are the strongest ones. Today on Life Stories, we'll take you on an emotional and surprising journey. This is the story of Martha Collins, a cleaner whom everyone assumed was ordinary. But in reality, she held an entire empire in her hands. A woman who rose from the lowest positions to take control of the very company where people once saw her as nothing more than a shadow. Get ready to experience a story that not only inspires but also changes the way you perceive the true value of a person. And in the end, let's uncover profound lessons about resilience, determination, and the importance of respect. Are you ready? Let's dive into this story. People often say that how someone treats the quietest employees is a true reflection of their character. At Sterling Corporation, a major corporation headquartered in the heart of Manhattan, no one paid attention to a small woman named Martha Collins. She wore a faded gray-blue uniform, pushing an old cleaning cart through the gleaming hallways of the office. Her hair was neatly tied back, her hands roughened by years of hard work, and her eyes often cast downward as if afraid of bothering anyone. To the impeccably dressed employees in suits, Martha was not a person. She was more like a part of the environment, present, but invisible. What they didn't know was that behind her humble appearance lay a story that, when revealed, would force everyone to reconsider their own perspectives. To the executives in expensive suits, Martha Collins was nothing more than a faint shadow, a nameless employee whose sole purpose was to clean up the messes they casually left behind. On that Tuesday morning, Richard Harris, one of Sterling Corp's senior directors, leaned back in his chair in the conference room as Martha carefully wiped each glass pane. He smirked, his tone dripping with disdain. "Hey, make sure those windows are spotless. All right? We've got some very important meetings here," he said, accompanied by a self-satisfied grin. The sound of laughter from his colleagues echoed in agreement, turning Martha into the punchline of their joke. But she didn't react, simply bowing her head and continuing her work. No one realized that her silence held far more than they could ever imagine. Martha said nothing. She didn't flinch, nor did she respond to the sarcasm. She simply nodded quietly, her hands diligently polishing every corner of the glass. Yet, within that silence, there was something unusual, a quiet strength, an unspoken resolve that no one in the room could recognize. They only saw a humble cleaner, but in reality, she was observing everything with sharp eyes and a mindset they couldn't possibly comprehend. Except for Samantha Blake, a new hire fresh out of college, stepping into Sterling Corp with high hopes. While everyone else ignored Martha's presence, Samantha noticed something different. It wasn't the way Martha cleaned or her diligence, but the calm yet commanding demeanor of this woman. Each time Martha walked down the hallway, Samantha observed that her gaze didn't linger on routine tasks. Instead, her eyes seemed to take in the entire space, observing every detail, every person, every situation. There was an intelligence and a quiet composure in her presence, as if she understood everything that others failed to notice. Samantha couldn't explain why, but she felt that Martha was more than just a cleaner. There was a subtlety, a hidden depth about her that, if noticed closely, would evoke curiosity and respect. That feeling made it impossible for Samantha to look away from her, even as everyone else continued to ignore her presence. That afternoon, the atmosphere in the office suddenly grew heavier than usual. William Hartman, the CEO of Sterling Corporation, had just flown in from Los Angeles to attend a critical performance review meeting. William was a renowned figure in the industry, not just for his sharp strategic vision, but also for his decisiveness, often bordering on coldness. Whenever he appeared, no one could maintain their composure, and the meeting room would immediately grow tense. All eyes were on him, trying to anticipate what decisions he might make today that could shift the company's trajectory. But no one, not even the most seasoned executives, could have predicted that this meeting would not only transform the company but also upend their lives. As he entered the room, silence fell instantly. William Hartman always had that kind of presence, Just being there was enough to make the atmosphere suffocatingly tense. Yet this time, the unexpected came from an unusual gaze. His gaze stopped at Martha, the woman standing quietly in the corner of the room with her cleaning cart. In stark contrast to the tense atmosphere, he unexpectedly smiled, a gesture no one in the room could have foreseen. "Martha," he spoke, his voice deep and strangely warm. "I think it's time." All eyes turned to her, and the entire room seemed to freeze in astonishment. No one understood what was happening, but they knew, without a doubt, that this moment was about to change everything. The executives exchanged confused glances, none of them understanding what was happening. Richard Harris, always smug about his position, stood frozen in place. The arrogant smile that had once graced his face vanished entirely, replaced by undisguised shock. Meanwhile, Martha gently set down the cleaning cloth, her movements slow but deliberate. She stood up straight, her previously humble demeanor now radiating a strength no one had ever noticed before. "Yes, Mr. Hartman," she replied, her voice steady yet filled with unmistakable certainty. Her words weren't loud, but in the deathly silent room, they resonated clearly, leaving everyone holding their breath in anticipation of what would happen next. She stepped forward, each movement slow but filled with purpose. The room seemed to freeze, the air thick with tension. Martha, the cleaning woman they had ignored and looked down on, now exuded an entirely different aura. At that moment, William Hartman turned to the executives, his gaze sharp as steel but his tone curiously calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, each word cutting through the charged atmosphere like a blade. "Allow me to introduce you to the largest shareholder of Sterling Corp., Martha Collins." A wave of stunned silence swept through the room, eyes widened in disbelief. Whispers mingled with the suffocating stillness. The woman they had once scorned turned out to wield the greatest power of all, a reality none of them could have imagined mere minutes earlier. The room erupted into chaos. Whispers of astonishment echoed everywhere, interspersed with disbelieving glances. Some executives scrambled to make sense of what was happening, while others sat frozen, unable to utter a word. Richard Harris, who just hours earlier had mocked Martha, now looked as if he'd seen a ghost. The smugness on his face had completely vanished, replaced by an unmistakable mix of panic and fear. As for Martha, she was no longer the humble woman pushing a cleaning cart they had thought her to be. She stood tall, her shoulders exuding pride, and an undeniable confidence radiated from every movement. Her presence now forced everyone to confront their own misconceptions, realizing how gravely they had misjudged her, and understanding that the price of that mistake would be far from small. "For years," Martha began, her voice steady but each word sharp as a blade, "I've observed how this company operates, not from the boardrooms or financial reports, but from the floors you walk on, the hallways you pass through every day, and the rooms you leave in disarray." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces before her. "And what I've seen is a culture that prioritizes profit over people, an environment where arrogance completely overshadows respect. But starting today, that is going to change." Her words echoed through the dead silent room like a razor-sharp blade slicing through the veneer of complacency surrounding those seated there. Each sentence cut deep, forcing them to confront their own actions and question themselves. The meeting room, once a place where they felt powerful, had now become a space where they were compelled to face their mistakes. The transformation in Martha was undeniable. The woman they had once dismissed now stood before them as a symbol of strength and resilience. She was no longer the quiet cleaner they had disregarded, but a woman who had overcome every obstacle to rise to the top, owning the very empire they worked for. Richard Harris, his face pale and his hands trembling as they gripped the chair, tried to stammer out a few words. His broken voice betrayed his shock. "Mrs. Martha, I didn't know. I had no idea." His words trailed off into the heavy silence, but Martha's gaze didn't waver, steady and unyielding, as if she had heard such excuses countless times before. At this moment, she wasn't interested in late apologies. She wanted action to bring about real change. Martha's gaze fixed on Richard, cold and unwavering. "That's right. You didn't know," she said, her tone frighteningly direct. "And that's the problem. You never cared enough to know. To you, I was just a uniform, not a person." She paused, letting her words sink into the heavy tension that filled the room. Then, with a decisive voice, she declared, "You're fired, Richard." Effective immediately. The entire room froze. Richard was stunned, his face pale as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. The arrogance and smugness he once wore so proudly had vanished, replaced by panic and helplessness as he realized his actions had led him to this moment. No one in the room dared to speak, for they all understood that this wasn't just a lesson for Richard, it was a warning for everyone. The man who once prided himself on his career, who climbed the ladder of power by exploiting and stepping on others, had now been brought down by his own arrogance. He lowered his head, unable to meet Martha's gaze, nor the eyes of those around him. In this moment, it wasn't just Richard's personal failure. It was a sobering wake-up call for everyone who had grown accustomed to disregarding the quietest among them. "This is a wake-up call for all of you," Martha declared, her sharp gaze sweeping across each face in the room. "Sterling Corp will no longer tolerate arrogance or the disregard for others. If you can't adapt to the change, the door is always open. But remember this, from today onward, everything will be different." Her voice rang out with unwavering strength, each word a warning that couldn't be ignored. The remaining executives sat in silence, their eyes uneasy but also filled with contemplation. In a corner of the room, Samantha Blake quietly observed, her heart swelling with undeniable admiration. This wasn't just a shift in power, it was a revolution. A woman who had once been deemed invisible was now at the center of transformative change. And Samantha knew she was witnessing a moment that would go down in the company's history. Martha turned to William, her voice softer now, carrying a hint of emotion. "Thank you for believing in me, even when no one else did." William Hartman smiled, his gaze filled with respect. "Believing in you was never difficult. Martha, you are the epitome of strength and determination. This company needs leaders like you, people who not only understand the value of hard work, but also grasp the power of patience and perseverance." His words seemed to dissolve the lingering tension in the room, while firmly establishing that the revolution Martha had initiated had the full backing of the highest authority. It wasn't just trust. It was the recognition she had rightfully earned after everything she had endured. Martha let her gaze sweep across the room one final time, each look piercing straight into the hearts of those seated. She paused, her voice firm, yet filled with a stern resolve. "This is your moment to change, to come together and create something more meaningful. Don't let this opportunity go to waste." Then she turned and walked out, leaving behind a meeting room filled with stunned faces, people gradually realizing that nothing would ever be the same again. A new chapter for Sterling Corp had begun, and it would be written in an entirely different way. In the quiet hallway, Samantha Blake hurried after her. "Mrs. Collins," she called, her voice choked with emotion and admiration. "Thank you for everything." Martha stopped and turned to the young woman, her expression much warmer than the composed demeanor she had shown in the meeting room. "There's no need to thank me, Samantha," she said, her voice gentle but deeply meaningful. "Just remember, your value is never determined by others. That's something you must define for yourself." Samantha nodded, her heart swelling with inspiration. She knew in that moment that not only would the company change, but her own path forward would also be forever transformed. Martha smiled softly, her eyes filled with encouragement. "There's no need to thank me, Samantha," she repeated. "Always remember, your worth doesn't come from what others say about you. It comes from how you see yourself. Own that." As Martha Collins stepped out onto the bustling streets of Manhattan, the atmosphere around her seemed to shift. The city, with its towering skyscrapers of glass and steel, symbols of power and ambition, now stood as a testament to what could be achieved when a person is determined to rise above adversity. The dazzling lights and hurried crowds seemed to reflect her story of resilience. A woman once dismissed but who never abandoned her dreams. And as for Sterling Corp., that day would be etched into their memory forever. The day they, smug in their power, mocked Martha, a humble cleaner, never realizing she was the one holding the key to their future. Now, Sterling has not only changed its leadership, but also its very essence. They learned a profound lesson that no one should be judged by appearances, and those you underestimate might just be the ones with the greatest strength. Martha's story will forever serve as a vivid reminder that patience and determination can achieve extraordinary things. The story of Martha Collins is a powerful reminder never to judge a person by their outward appearance. Those who seem invisible, dismissed, or forgotten might possess the strength and will to transform an entire system. Patience, determination, and the refusal to give up are the keys to rising above adversity and achieving success against all odds. Always remember that your value is not determined by how others see you, but by how you define yourself. If you enjoy meaningful and inspiring stories like this one, please support Life Stories by subscribing to our channel so you never miss a story, liking the video if you found this story interesting, sharing it with your friends and family to spread this powerful message. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.